When I first started reviewing these Gary Lewis and the Playboys albums, I noted that quite a few of them didn't make it past vinyl. They didn't get to CD or even to tape in some cases. So you can imagine my pleasant surprise when at the end of 2024, two new Gary Lewis and the Playboys CD twofers were announced. Closed cover before playing, paired with Rhythm of the Rain and Hayride, along with some bonus live tracks. And the final album on the list, I'm on the road right now, paired with several of Gary's non-album singles. Big surprise here. And I've listened to these, they sound great, really enjoy them. Can't wait till I get to this part of the discography so we can talk more about them. But today's Gary Lewis and the Playboys album remains strictly on vinyl. Welcome back, Gary Lewis and the Playboys fans. Last time we talked about the LP She's Just My Style, featuring a great title song and a few unusual covers. Today, let's head to spring of 1966 and talk about Gary Lewis and the Playboys' Hits Again. So Hits Again was released in the spring of 1966. Most sources list April, not all of them, but April seems to be at least kind of the general consensus. This album is interesting as it was the last top 50 album of new material that the band released. So far their LPs had kind of charted sort of hit and miss. They hadn't had any runaway hits, but everything had charted. The group's next album, the hits package Golden Greats, which we'll talk about in the next Gary Lewis and the Playboys video, this one proved to be the highest charting of all of their albums, but that of course is a compilation, not new material. This would be the last time one of their new material albums broke the top 50. This also contains their last two top 10 US singles, I should say. There are other singles they did after this that would chart higher in other parts of the world, but this kind of marks the point where the group is losing some of that traction, losing some of their popularity, that sort of thing. So let's start, as always, with the write-up on the back. Every album has tried something different, from Jerry Lewis and his wife writing something to, little written messages about catch 'em on TV or in such and such movie. This album contains the most generic one imaginable, just that the band has so many great hits, and check out all these great hits, and like hits, well, you'll like Gary Lewis and the Playboys. It isn't even given an author. I think it's completely anonymous, so I don't know, it feels like no one really put a whole lot of time or effort into that. You can also notice that we only have Gary on the package. Heck, there's not even a different picture on the back, just their previous albums, that kind of thing. So no Playboys are acknowledged. So although the back of the package here boasts about Gary Lewis and the Playboys have instant hits, this album only went to number 47. Alright, so let's talk about behind the scenes stuff, because there was quite a bit of drama going on, and actually the booklets for some of the more popular greatest hits packages, as well as some of the bigger collections, note that there were all kinds of issues going on. There's a big write-up in one of those booklets about how the bass player kept changing, and someone would be the bass player one day and replace the next. And that was a can of worms I didn't really want to get into with Gary Lewis and the Playboys, because we could make whole videos about who played on what song and who did this and who did that and this person left. I didn't really want to get into all that. But the probably bigger change-up going on behind the scenes around the time of this album, and the singles are being recorded around this time too, Snuff Garrett, the producer who had kind of cultivated all these great hits and helped to produce the albums and everything, was out. Gary Lewis fired him. And you might recall on the last record we talked about, production credit is predominantly attributed to Gary Lewis and Dave Pell. Snuff Garrett still has a few credits because he'd worked on these songs that were singles. But this one, Dave Pell takes over as the de facto credited producer. Gary doesn't even get a production credit. Again, there's one exception to that, which we'll talk about later. You might even be able to see the asterisk on the back about which song is the standout, or I should say the odd man out. But it's kind of different to realize that production and everything else was changing so rapidly. Snuff Garrett was later rehired, but he claims that it was never the same after that. That he wanted to stick around, and although I like Dave Pell's production, the booklets, again, in some of these CDs kind of vilify him and paint him as being lazy, but I think his production's quite good. He just maybe wasn't quite as into it as Snuff Garrett was. It seems Dave Pell's philosophy was, well, we're a hit group, whatever we do is going to be successful. While Snuff Garrett was a man with a mission, and he knew kind of what he wanted to do, as opposed to Dave Pell, who just kind of maybe did what he felt like or let other people kind of dictate what was going on. Alright, Leon Russell, however, still gets credit as arranger. So that's a plus there. And several of the other names in the credits are ones we've seen before. So some things changed, some things didn't. One thing we've learned with Gary Lewis and the Playboys, stuff is constantly changing behind the scenes. So no Playboy pictures, different producer, pretty lame, underwhelming write-up. But honestly, some pretty fun songs. I think this is one that a CD release could benefit quite well. So let's get into side one of the record and see what all we got. So we start off with a cover by the Hollies. Look through any window, yeah. What do you see? Now, like many of their other previous studio albums, which are very heavy on covers, most of the time, not always, but most of the time the group tends to copy those originals pretty closely, and their covers turn out fairly similar, usually just sort of minimized, a little less ambitious, and this is no exception. The Hollies' Look Through Any Window is pretty funky, pretty upbeat. Gary does a nice kind of light pop cover of it, not as ambitious, not as memorable, but certainly very serviceable, and gets the album off to a good start. It's a fun song, Gary does well on it. Then we have a Bobby Goldsboro cover. They've done Bobby Goldsboro before with songs like Voodoo Woman. Bobby's It's Too Late, yeah, It's Too Late, is very soulful, and it's very kind of a melancholy song, but also has a lot of energy. Gary's cover does not have the soulfulness that Bobby's original does. Gary's is just kind of a light pop cover. It hurts the song somewhat. I think it kind of diminishes that emotional impact, but the cover is well done. I mean, it's not done poorly or anything like that, so it's okay. Could have been a little bit better, I think. Then we have an odd one. I was born to be another face in the crowd. I think Face in the Crowd is something of an original for the group. Matthew Ward had a single released around the same time. You can hear it on YouTube. There was a Capitol single. And his is really like psychedelic and kind of weird. Gary's is a much more traditional sort of pop cover, and I think it works really well. It actually helps the song out to be this kind of honest song about everyone looks at you, but no one really sees you. No one really knows who you are. That works better as a pop song than as some trippy psychedelic thing. I don't think Matthew Moore's version was particularly successful. Gary, it would only be an album cut as far as I know for him. I don't think it was ever released to a 45. It should be noted that Face in the Crowd was written by David Gates before he joined Bread. I don't even think Bread was dough at this point. I think it was still an idea and not actually a thing. But it's a nice song, one of my favorites, very underrated one, I think. I like Gary's pop version as opposed to some weird, trippy, psychedelic odyssey. Now we have the Kinks cover next. They've done the Kinks before. You might remember they'd taken All Day and All of the Night and turned it from kind of a proto-metal rocker into this All Day and All of the Night really gentle pop thing. And the Kinks' Well-Respected Man is kind of a weird song. The Kinks, of course, after they became famous, started hobnobbing with very rich people, very influential people, and realized they didn't have anything in common with these kind of upper-class, blue-blood snob kind of individuals. So they wrote this song as a parody of them, and Gary Lewis does it, pretty much faithfully. But the weird thing is he keeps all of the British terminology. He says things like pater. He uses a term the British use for cigarettes that I'm not going to say on this channel. And he keeps all that stuff, and it feels really weird to have this kind of all-American, boy next door band singing this obviously very British sounding song with no change-ups or anything. I don't know, it's kind of strange. It's probably my least favorite one on this album just because it doesn't feel like a song he should really even be doing. And we go for an oldie now, Bobby V's Rubber Ball, I Come Bouncing Back to You. That had been a big hit for Bobby V about 1960. Gary actually does the opposite of what we'd expect. He takes the song and amps it up. They add this kind of Wolfman Jack-esque vocal. It's often attributed to Leon Russell. After "Rubber Ball, I come bouncing back to you," it goes, "That's right, baby." That kind of thing. And it's definitely a lot more upbeat and much more of a rocker than the original was. It makes sense to kind of reimagine an older song in a new style. You might remember this is what the back of the She's Just My Style album boasted about. Oh, Gary can take any other artist's song and make it his own. But this album didn't really commit to that. But if that cover of Rubber Ball had been here, I would have believed it, because he turns it into a really fun rocker. It's just one of the best covers they do on this album, certainly. And I like that he gave it his own style, made it his own, and really amped it up and rocked out with it. So that was pretty fun. And we end side one with a Gary Lewis and the Playboys original, "Green Grass Round My Window." Alright, number 8 charting hit for the group there, still done in the live set. The booklets for some of the compilations and things like that are very, very kind to this song, noting things like Leon Russell's piano part, Tommy Tedesco's contributions there on guitar, things like that. It's a really fun song, almost kind of a companion to something like the Beach Boys' All Summer Long. You know, it's very much a spring song, get out and about, be with the one you love as the weather turns nice, we can enjoy the green grass round my window, all that kind of stuff. Great original by the group there. And it was the B-side, or I should say the B-side to it, is also on this album. We'll get there in just a moment. And I should also add the Ventures have a really fun cover version of Green Grass, but theirs is just an instrumental. But Green Grass, still very much a relevant and well-remembered Gary Lewis and the Playboys song. Can't recommend it enough. Another highlight of this album. So if you flip the record over, we get my other favorite Gary Lewis and the Playboys song. One of my favorites, "Don't You Know That She's Just My Style." And my other favorite is from this one. It's "Autumn, Autumn, Autumn, How Your Name Has Touched My Life." It's kind of hard to think about if Autumn is a cover or not, because the Vogues apparently had recorded it in 1965 but not used it. Around the same time as this album, the Thomas Group did a single version. You can find that on YouTube very easily, which is nice. It's not as good as Gary's though. Gary owns the song. It was just an album cut for the Playboys as far as I know. I don't think it was ever released as a single. It's on a lot of their compilation albums, but Autumn is just such a beautiful song. Written by the team of Sloan and Barry, who wrote a lot for Jan and Dean. Gary has a great vocal. I don't know, again, that you can necessarily call it a Playboys original, but it's certainly very close. And I think it's just an amazing song, and I think it speaks for itself. If I tell you now to go out and listen to it, I would probably sum it up better than anything I could say. Next up, we're back to covers again. Both the Knickerbockers and the Vogues did a song called "One Track Mind." Maybe I'm a stubborn fool. And here, Gary Lewis and the Playboys pretty much just copy it the way it is. They go pretty hard, as the Knickerbockers version had too. It's definitely more of a rocker. They could have kind of stripped it down and done maybe like a light pop, bouncier cover, but they opted not to do that. They kept it as a rocker, and I think that works. Again, it follows the original so closely, I can't really recommend it because I think the Knickerbockers version's better, but I do like Gary's version. I'm glad they didn't streamline it down so it lost its power. And then one that it was originally by the Vogues as well, but today actually we attribute it to the Turtles. No, I should add a correction. The Vogues did not do One Track Mind, that was the Vanguards. Sorry about that. But the Vogues did do a version of "You Baby," but today we remember it mostly for the Turtles. "You baby, nobody but you." Gary's version copies the Turtles cover of the song. Again, it was a big hit for them. And Gary sells this song because his voice works for it so well. His version sounds really good because his vocal is completely believable. Little ray of sunshine, little bit of soul, that kind of thing. I like it a lot. He does a good job with it. And then we have "I Can Read Between the Lines." This was the B-side to "Green Grass," written by songwriter Kenneth Johnson. It's a kind of a melancholy song, you know what you're being told by your better half isn't necessarily the case. I can read between the lines, and realize that. It's a melancholy song, But it is really upbeat, it is really fun. It doesn't, drag the feel of the album down, as most of these are more positive songs. It certainly doesn't do that. It fits in sonically. And of course, the last top 10 hit the group had in the US, of course, was Greengrass, back with I Can Read Between the Lines. And we know, of course, I've said it a million times before, Liberty had the firm belief that a B-side should be an original, but it wasn't going to get a ton of radio airplay, it wasn't going to get pushed out a lot. The A-side was what people bought and paid for and listened to, but a lot of the original B-sides pop up on many greatest hits packages, I Can Read Between the Lines being no exception to that. Then we have one by the Lovin' Spoonful. The group had done Lovin' Spoonful stuff before, of course. This is another one that works because Gary's voice sells it. What a day for a daydream. What a day for a daydreaming boy. It's not as ambitious as the Lovin' Spoonful's version is. It's kind of stripped down a little bit, but Gary's voice sells it, and you can tell they carefully studied the Lovin' Spoonful's original and copied it as best they could, while also kind of simplifying it. But it does work as an album track. Again, another cover that's pretty innocuous, but certainly not bad. And we have our big finale, what we're building to, Sure Gonna Miss Her. Sure gonna miss her, I'm sure gonna miss her every day, that kind of thing. So, Sure Gonna Miss Her, and this is the one that has the asterisk, as the Snuff Garrett was involved with it, more so than Dave Pell, so he gets kind of the producer's credit. Yep. So Sure Gonna Miss Her has a couple different mixes. Most, including this record and most of the compilations, use the one that has kind of the mariachi sounding horns at the beginning. There was a whole brass section. There is an alternate mix without the horns, and that one you can find on YouTube very easily. I know that's on at least some, I believe it's mono single pressings. If someone's an expert on that 45, they can comment below, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. But Sure Gonna Miss Her went all the way to number 9, so very successful. The B-side, I Don't Want to Say Goodnight, was never released on a Gary Lewis and the Playboys studio album. It does pop up on compilations. It's a nice little song too. We'll talk about that when we get to some of those compilation albums and things like that. But oddly, they did not include it here, which is surprising. You'd think they'd want to stick maybe one more original on there. But they could have, at some point, I guess, been contemplating keeping I Don't Want to Say Goodnight for another time. But back to Sure Gonna Miss Her. Gary Lewis noted how surprised he was when he found out this was the most downloaded Gary Lewis and the Playboys song of all their discography, that this was the big internet seller. He noted that he was very surprised by that, though he did think it was a good song. He didn't realize people were going to choose it over something like This Diamond Ring. It is a very, very good song, and another one of those ones that kind of speaks for itself. Another one too that's kind of melancholy, but it's so upbeat that it isn't gonna, throw an album off or anything like that. So I really enjoy it, and I think it speaks for itself. Sure gonna miss her every day, and that kind of thing. So let's take a look at the record real quick. So overall, a fun collection. I like that we get a lot of covers that kind of feel right being slotted together. Some of them streamlined pop versions, some of them more like rockers. I like that, maybe kind of reflecting the changing taste in music of the time. Let's see the Liberty Records thing there. But what are your thoughts on Gary Lewis and the Playboys' Hits Again? As far as I know, if you want it in your collection, you have to buy it on record. You can't find, of course, rips of the entire album on YouTube and so on, so it's not impossible to find. But next time when we talk about Gary Lewis and the Playboys, we'll be looking at the first of their hits packages, the very successful Golden Greats, complete with a golden gatefold. Should I say golden gatefold? I don't know. And a pretty good size write-up. So we'll talk about this next time when we get to Gary Lewis. Till then, my friends, I hope 2025 is treating you well. Make sure you comment below. Remember to like the video as well, and we'll see you next time. So long.